let's dive into this information tonight. So number one on the list of what I like to call toxic sweeteners is something called aspartame. Now, aspartame, we need to get a better marker here. Aspartame is a big one on this list because it goes by the name of, trade names of NutraSweet or Equal. But aspartame has been linked to a number of different problems. One of them is migraine. It's actually been shown to be, for many people, not for everyone, but for many people, migraine. A migraine trigger. But a number of studies have shown this to be a neurotoxic substance. So, where I would suggest you pay very close attention if you're finding that you're having tremors, if you find that you're having neurological symptoms, things like neuropathy or things like forgetfulness. I've seen people come to see me that had memory issues, brain fog, cognitive clarity issues, migraine problems, all as a result of being exposed to aspartame. Now remember, this one is the one in the little blue packet. So if you're out and about at the restaurant, if you look for the one that's in the little blue packet, you'll know that's the one that we're talking about. Now, one of the other ones that I would call toxic is saccharin. Now, there are some animal studies that show that this one is carcinogenic. So cancer is a big part of what we see potentially with this one. Now, I've also seen this, and this one, by the way, is in the little pink packets. And this one goes by another trade name, which is Sweeteners. It was used a lot more earlier on, maybe 20 years ago. It was used a lot more heavily. And then aspartame came along, and then subsequently the next one on the list, which is Sucralose, came along. So these particular elements or these particular agents, not so good. Saccharin shown to cause cancer. In animals particularly, there aren't any long-term human studies, so we can't confirm one way or the other that definitely it's a problem in that regard. And obviously, if it's causing it though in animals, you want to be cautious about putting it into your diet. Now, one of the other ones that we have is we've got something called Sucralose. And again, the trade name for this one is Splenda. Now, I want to dive into this one a little bit more because these other ones are not used so much today. This is really the big one that we'll see used in most products. This is chlorinated sugar. So basically, I want you to understand that they've just substituted into sugar a chlorine molecule. Now, first of all, chlorine isn't healthy. It's not healthy in your water. We don't want to drink chlorine in our water. It's used as an antibacterial, so in a sense, it's an antibiotic. So what they've done is they've attached a chlorine molecule to sugar to make it not absorb as well so that it becomes a non-caloric sweetener. But remember, what does chlorine do? So if it's got chlorine is also known as a halide. Now, you may have heard me talk about halides in the past. Halides are in a family of elements that compete with each other, and one of the other famous halides that you've probably heard of is iodine. Now, iodine is very critical for your thyroid hormone. So when we talk about T4, the 4 represents iodine. And so what chlorine, or getting excessive exposure to chlorine, can do in the diet is it will compete with iodine for uptake into your thyroid to produce properly T4 or thyroxine, which is your thyroid hormone. So this particular sweetener, just by default of being chlorinated, again, is going to create a halide-based competition for iodine uptake into your thyroid gland. Now, aside from that, there are some general problems with all three of these that I think is important. One of the reasons why they're being used. So let's think about why these guys are being used. They're no-calorie sweeteners. So the myth that prevails out there in the world, if they're no-calorie sweeteners, it's trying to get sweet into food but minimize calories, because calories can, excessive calories from sugar obviously linked to diabetes and obesity and linked to metabolic syndrome and other disorders. And so if we could artificially create sweet without creating the calories, then technically maybe we could have something that would work to not generate those diseases. But the problem isn't necessarily with the caloric value of sugar. See, the sugar isn't evil because it has calories. Food has calories. We need to eat calories. It's empty calories that create a problem. Now, you say, well, these are definitely empty calories, or they're empty of calories and they're empty of nutrition. But the problem associated with having something sweet is that there's a neurological mechanism that's triggered that it's not. So again, let me back. It's not about weight loss, or at least it shouldn't be for you, because weight loss doesn't equate to good health. And for many people, weight loss equates to bad health. But so I want to just emphasize, these are no-calorie sweeteners, but it shouldn't be about weight loss. It should be about the neurological consequence of what these sweeteners do and how they trigger a response in your body. So some research shows that these sweeteners, even though they don't have calories, will trigger an insulin response. So you're still getting the same hormone response that you would get whether you were eating sugar or not. So the problem is there's a caloric effect of foods, and then there's what's called a hormonal effect of foods, or the hormonal impact of food. So just because something doesn't have calories doesn't mean it doesn't affect your hormones. And where we're worried about diabetes and we're worried about these sweeteners is that if we're creating and triggering an insulin response by consuming them, and that's still driving up or driving up one of the hormones. Understand what insulin, high levels of insulin are associated with cancer, high levels of insulin are associated with diabetes, high levels of insulin, when you're triggering an insulin response repetitively by using a lot of these artificial sweeteners, it's associated with insulin resistance. And insulin resistance leads to high blood sugar. And high blood sugar leads to, am I still on the board? Am I going over? High blood sugar leads to increased fat storage through triglycerides. Your body, when it has too much sugar and can't process it, will convert that sugar into triglycerides and store it as fat. So even though these are no-calorie sweeteners, and the marketing around the message here is that it's about weight loss, you can see that the hormonal effect of the sweeteners creates an insulin resistance that leads to increased blood sugar, increased fat storage, and so it's really not about weight loss at all. And so it's really not all that even that helpful. Only now, instead of getting calories, we're getting potentially toxic substances that create problems in other ways. So whereas this one is a known neurotoxin, this one is a carcinogen, and this one has chlorine in it, and it can disrupt thyroid uptake of iodine, creating a potential for thyroid problems. Now, I did a video a couple of weeks ago about a new research report that came out on artificial sweeteners actually contributing to autoimmune thyroid disease. You should go check that video out, where I actually walk you through that and show you the research studies behind that as well. So toxic sweeteners, if we're talking about artificial, there are other ones, like a sulfame is another one, but these are the big three that I want you to know about. Now, beyond that, there is another toxic sweetener, and it's the tried and true classic, right? Processed sugar. So many of you will justify sugar as, oh, well, sugar, it's organic, so it's less toxic than these things, but it's still sugar. And remember, even though these three are about no-calorie sweeteners, sugar is going to have an insulin response. It's also going to have a caloric value. Now, when you eat sugar, understand that for every gram of carbohydrate that you consume in the form of empty calorie, so sugar's an empty calorie, completely an empty calorie, meaning that when you eat sugar, there's no vitamins, there's no minerals in it. And so what happens is your body then has to take its own nutritional vitamin and mineral storage and has to use it to process the calories in sugar to generate energy. And so if you're eating high quantities of sugar over time, you're actually stealing nutrients from your body's reserve tank to try to generate energy from a food source, technically a food source, although I wouldn't call sugar a food, but from a source of calories that has no nutritive value. And so you end up becoming more and more malnourished. Now, that's just one of the side effects. We haven't even really touched on what this stuff does to the GI tract, what this stuff actually does to the microbiome. Increase in sugar helps to promote yeast overgrowth. It also helps to promote abnormal, we'll abbreviate that, microbiome. So it helps certain microbiota grow that we don't necessarily want within our GI tract. So it's going to promote the wrong bacteria. It promotes yeast overgrowth, so you can get all the side effects that are associated. If you've ever suffered with yeast overgrowth, and I'm not, there are different kinds of yeast overgrowth. Some people have yeast growing in their toenails, some people on their tongue, the oral thrush, some people have yeast. Women can have vaginal yeast infections, but many people have a systemic yeast overgrowth in the blood as well as in the gut. And this can lead to things like leaky gut, contribute to a number of different forms of autoimmune disease. Remember that having yeast inside of you, and everybody has some yeast, but having overabundance of yeast, these critters will steal your B vitamins. They'll take them from you. They'll use them for themselves to grow and replicate, and they can create problems in that way. So again, let's not forget about sugar, because remember where these top three began was in the quest to find something that was a substitute for sugar. And now the quest for finding that substitute led to a neurotoxin, a cancer-causing agent, and a chlorinated sugar molecule that drives insulin resistance and fat and weight gain, all to supplant this one that promotes a very, very similar response. Hey, don't forget to check out the rest of the series right here. Make sure you hit subscribe below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.